Today I was really talking about the Trump phenomenon, why it happened and what it means, and in particular what it means for Australia and our region, because obviously the United States alliance is massively important to Australia's security, and US directions on questions like trade policy are vital to our future economic prosperity as well. I think there's a very long history to the integration between the Australian and US military forces. It goes right back to the Second World War, where our forces fought together in the Pacific theatre very closely, and ever since then we've built an increasingly strong and close military relationship with the United States. And in large part, that's because of Australia's strategic circumstances. We're a large country, we've got a huge maritime zone, we've got a very small population, and we live in a fairly uncertain region. So we've always looked to have a partnership with a strong, reliable strategic partner like the United States, and access to US military technology, training with the US military, and cooperation with the US in our own region and in other theatres like the Middle East, where we're fighting together to combat ISIL, for example, is fundamental to our national security. I think the three threats that I focus on in the Indo-Pacific region are North Korea, which is developing nuclear weapons and missiles. The rate of its weapons program development has increased very rapidly. They've conducted 5 nuclear tests now. Last year alone, they conducted over 20 missile tests. There was one just a few days ago in waters off Japan. This is a very significant threat, and the fact that North Korea, within 2 or 3 years, could develop a missile that can carry a nuclear warhead to the United States, I think changes the perspective entirely. The second one is China, where it's developing very sophisticated military forces that are designed to make it harder for the US to operate in waters it's traditionally operated in the Western Pacific. China's deploying a range of coercive techniques to shape the behaviour and the security choices of its neighbours around the region, and it's asserting itself a lot more in the East China Sea, in waters off Japan, and in the South China Sea nearer to Australia. And I think that's causing a lot of concern around the region about what sort of Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific region we are going to end up living in the future. And then the third threat that I highlight that has gone a little off the radar lately is the threat of Islamist terrorism in Southeast Asia, because ironically, as coalition military forces succeed against ISIL in Syria and Iraq, the risk is that foreign fighters who have been trained there and have experienced combat there will be displaced and come back to Southeast Asia. There's 500 or 600 people fighting in Syria and Iraq with ISIL and other organisations like Al-Nusra. And the risk is that they come back to Southeast Asia, that they're better trained and better equipped and better networked than previous jihadis who fought in Afghanistan, for example, and that they could pose a serious threat in countries like Indonesia, Malaysia and the Philippines. The big difference is the speed of change and the number of simultaneous issues that are all bubbling away, whether it's the threats I talked about from North Korea, China's military modernisation, terrorism, transnational issues like drugs and people smuggling, natural disasters, all of these things bubbling away together. And today, when there are crises, they seem to come in waves, one after another, whereas previously, for example, the East Timor crisis that I was involved in back in the late 1990s, it built over months and months. Then the crisis sort of peaked, and again it took a few months to resolve, and then it faded away. These days it's entirely different. The tempo is just so much quicker because the world's more connected and because of social media and so forth.